Dr. Worden is the chairman of the Breakthrough Prize Foundation and the executive director of the foundation's breakthrough initiatives. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in physics and astronomy from the University of Michigan and a PhD in astronomy from the University of Arizona. Prior to joining the Breakthrough Prize Foundation, Dr. Worden was the director of NASA Ames Research Center at Moffett Field in California until his retirement in 2015. He has held several positions in the United States Air Force and was research professor of astronomy at the University of Arizona. He is a recognized expert on space and science issues, both civil and military, and he has been a leader in building partnerships between governments and private sector internationally. What is not posted there is that, in my opinion, I'm going to give the guy credit, that between Clementine and LCROSS, those two missions are one of the reasons why we think there's so much water on the moon. And I think it's the reason there is a moon rush. So I'm just going to personally give you credit for starting what I think will be a stampede.
What I'm going to do is talk a little bit today about my own personal past. I'm almost 72. It's appropriate. I'm speaking to you from Trier, Germany, which was the oldest city in Germany. It was founded by Julius Caesar in the 1st century BC, so probably an appropriate place to speak from. But I've got a little presentation here. As I noted, this is kind of a personal story, but I should probably give you a little background from my sponsor. I'm the chairman of the Breakthrough Prize Foundation, which was founded about a decade ago by a number of Silicon Valley moguls. And the first thing that we do is the Breakthrough Prize, which is the largest prizes in science. There are about 7 $3 million prizes. It's about, I might mention, it's about 3 times the size of a certain Swedish prize I'm not supposed to mention. But there are fundamental prizes in physics, mathematics, and life sciences. We also have early career prizes. And I'll talk about another prize, but how I got involved in this, as was noted, I was the director of NASA's Ames Research Center. And about 10 years ago, the Vanity Fair came to see me, and my chief of staff said I would never guess who was in my office. And I said, no, I probably wouldn't. And she said, it's Vanity Fair. And I said, well, are they here to see me because I'm the best dressed center director? And she says, no, you're kind of near the bottom. But it turns out that Vanity Fair puts on the post-Oscar party, which I've never been invited to, I keep hinting. But it's supposed to be the coolest party in Hollywood. So the idea they were going to set up the coolest party in Silicon Valley. And it's sort of now called the Oscars of Science. But it really is quite a ceremony. And since I was the landlord, you always invite the landlord for having a rowdy party. But this is really quite an interesting affair. It's the only big black tie affair in Silicon Valley. Hopefully we can have it in person here in the next few months in the fall. But I want to mention one particular recipient a couple of years ago. This is basically the inventor of the discoverer of the pulsar, and she was a graduate student, Jocelyn Bell Burnell, at Cambridge University in the 1960s, and she discovered this sort of strange signal that her advisors told her was rubbish. And in fact, she initially called it little green men. It was a radio signal, LGM1. And she persisted, and it turned out eventually to be the first radio pulsar, and it eventually got published. And the Nobel Prize was awarded, interestingly enough, to her advisors, but not to her. And we thought that was a great injustice. And Jocelyn is quite an impressive scientist in her own right now, and so we awarded her the Breakthrough Prize in Fundamental Physics. To her great credit, she spent the $3 million on founding graduate and postdoctoral fellowships for underserved groups, particularly women. So, hopefully we remedied the injustice a little bit. We also have another program which is for young people. I put this up because I'm kind of excited about it. I'm the chairman of the selection committee, but we give a Breakthrough Junior Challenge Prize to a person between the ages of 13 and 18. They're asked to do a 3-minute video on some principle of physics, mathematics, or fundamental biology. It's sort of interesting. We've now given 6 prizes. We're about to award the 7th. But the winner gets a $250,000 scholarship wherever they want to go. The school where they attend gets a $150,000 laboratory. But to me, what's one of the neatest things is the teacher that the student identifies that inspired him or her gets a $50,000 check. And it was interesting. The first young man that won this was from Cleveland, Ohio, and he didn't tell his teacher he'd nominated him. So when we called the teacher and asked where we send his $50,000 check, his first question was, "Is this a call from Nigeria?" And we finally convinced him, no, it's we're really serious. This is you're really the winner. The second part of what we do, and I'm not going to really talk about this other than say this is what I spend most of my time on, are a series of initiatives that were started in 2015, funded by one of the Breakthrough Prize founders. At the Royal Society in London. As you can see, the very famous scientist there, Stephen Hawking, was our scientific advisor until he passed away a couple of years ago. But the initiatives include 3 fundamental questions: is all about life? Is there life elsewhere? Is there intelligent life elsewhere? And can we travel between the stars? Well, let me now turn to the moon. I'm an old guy. As I said, I'm almost 72. My first involvement with lunar program was the Apollo 13 mission. Maybe it's appropriate that it didn't work so well, but when I was a college student, I was part of the Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps, and they took us down to see the Apollo 13 spacecraft. It was about 3 or 4 weeks before it was launched. And it was being stacked in the vehicle assembly building, so it was kind of an exciting experience for a young guy who was already convinced that I wanted to dedicate my life to science and space exploration. The role I actually played in Apollo 13 was minor but interesting. I was an undergrad at the University of Michigan, and there was this observatory that the university had that had been founded in the 1930s. And this is kind of a recurring theme, at a wealthy individual's estate not far from where I lived in Lake Angeles, Michigan, called the McMath-Hulbert Observatory. It still kind of exists, but in ruins. But one of the things that we were under contract for when I was there was called flare patrol observing. So during the Apollo programs, there was a lot of worry that if it had been a major solar flare, the astronauts would have been in grave danger. So there was a network of observers around the world that looked at the sun every few minutes to see if they could detect a solar flare. Or there was a filter on the telescope that filtered it all with the red light of hydrogen alpha. And so actually during the Apollo 13 mission, I was actually started working there in April of 1970. I was one of the flare patrol observers, and now it turns out there was a ultraviolet leak in the filter, which was discovered later. So if I look very carefully, I've got a hole burned in my retina. It doesn't do much other than I can see it on occasion. So this is my wound from Apollo, and so I feel proud that at least I took one for the team. My next experience with the moon was somewhat later, but let's see if and a lot of you may remember now that on the 20th anniversary of Apollo, the President Bush, George H.W. Bush, committed us to go back to the moon and on to Mars. And a lot of us said, look, all we needed to do was have a president like John F. Kennedy did to say we're going to go do this again. So this was it was a hot, nasty summer day in Washington. I had started working at the White House a few months before this, and I was actually the staff officer for the Space Exploration Initiative. So we were all quite excited. You can see here that President Bush signing it with the Vice President who was running the Space Council and the Apollo 11 astronauts, along with the NASA Administrator Richard Truly. So we said, okay, we're on our way. Not too much time later than that, we were bemoaning the fact that NASA had done what's called a 90-day study, which said, well, we needed to triple their budget and make the space station even bigger, buy another half dozen or dozen shuttles. And we were quite upset with that because it was clearly that wasn't going to happen. But it turns out another staff member and I, Stuart Nozette, who later got in quite a little bit of trouble, that's another story. He just got out of jail a couple of years ago, and I went over to a bar nearby. This plays a big role actually in a lot of things that gets done to get the moon move forward. And it turned out we were meeting a congressional staffer who was late. So we started, Stu started scribbling on a napkin, which I've actually got the copy of the napkin here. And said, well, why can't we do much cheaper missions than, $500 billion in 1989 money. And we've been working a lot with the Defense Department on the missile defense program. And so this napkin actually suggests modifying one of the space-based interceptors called a Brilliant Pebble at the time, that could we go to the moon. And what's kind of neat is, this is actually a real case of making the design on a napkin. So the mission was started, and a couple of years later, I went over and ran the technology program. And we did the Clementine mission, and it turned out, interestingly enough, I was actually fired just before the mission was launched, largely because I was doing Clementine. It was actually a kind of a sneaky space weapon test that got around the anti-ballistic missile treaty. It turns out that the treaty said that you couldn't test missile defense sensor or systems in Earth orbit, so we sort of figured out, well, that doesn't say anything about the moon. So the lawyers agreed, and so the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization went ahead with the Clementine mission, as you can see the logo here, and we basically picked Clementine as from the Oh My Darling Clementine. We said we had enough sort of goofy Greek gods and other things that NASA named missions after, so why don't we pick something that's generally American. It was a very successful mission. It went to the moon. It mapped the entire moon. It discovered the first evidence of ice in the lunar polar regions, which I think is a really key discovery. We were then going to go on and visit asteroids. Unfortunately, we had a software glitch, and we never got to the asteroid. But a very fun mission. As I said, I did get fired over doing this because when the new Clinton administration came in, they decided they didn't really want to do space weapons, and they finally figured out this was a nasty space weapon. So it was the program. They thought it was going to fail, so they let us launch it anyhow. But this was my first real lunar mission. It's a very, very exciting mission. A decade later, another president decided we were going to go back to the moon and Mars. This was the vision for space exploration that NASA had worked very hard. The previous effort was a complete failure, but shortly after this started, it turned out I was in the running to be the NASA administrator, but didn't get selected. It's probably a good thing. I got fired probably within a year or two. But I was given the job in 2006 to run the NASA Ames Research Center, which I think is sort of the renegade center in NASA. And it was a really cool job. And it turned out I was promised that NASA, that we could lead the new lunar exploration program, the robotic exploration program, not the human exploration program that President Bush had just started. It turned out that didn't last very long, and I'm probably known a lot for writing a paper, 20 years before that referred to NASA as a self-licking ice cream cone. And the reason that we called NASA a self-licking ice cream cone is that it had become basically a jobs program, and within about 2 months of me taking over at NASA Ames, the lunar robotic exploration program was sort of ripped away from us because that one of the bigger centers decided they wanted it, and they got it largely due to, and I won't go into details of who the person is in the lower right, but you probably all know him. And Alabama got the lead for robotic lunar exploration programs. The point is that national programs, particularly in the United States, are traditionally have been based mostly on regional politics, and I think that's a huge problem. And the reason I wrote that paper about 15 years before that date was to sort of decry that. But it turns out that Ames had already been given one mission, which they allowed us to continue, which was the Lunar Crater Observing and Sensing Satellite. Very, very cool mission. Was launched in 2009 in the midsummer. It was basically a secondary mission when the lunar orbiter, lunar reconnaissance orbiter that that NASA Goddard was running was launched. And what we basically did is we attached a small satellite. It was basically an adapter that for CubeSats and small sats to the upper stage of the booster. It was an Atlas booster. And it turned out this was kind of a really cool mission because this was NASA Ames' first really big mission that we ran. And I have to tell a little story here that it was if you've ever been to a NASA launch at Kennedy Space Center, there's a formal event called the Final Readiness Review, and there's this huge conference room. It was 200 or 300 people in it, and there's a big wooden table in the center, and that's where the primary players for the mission sit, and they go through all these briefings, then they do a readiness poll. And this was the first time that I was allowed to sit at what I call the adult table. And so they got around to me, and I couldn't resist being kind of a bit of a smart aleck. And so they'd gone through, said, launch vehicle is go, the range is go, weather go, so on and so forth. NASA Goddard was the primary mission, go. And of course, we were the secondary mission. I said, NASA Ames is go for the first precision bombing run on the moon. And there was a sort of a nervous laughter around the room. And so I decided this was really cool and put it on Twitter. And I got in a lot of trouble because the Clementine mission was kind of considered to be a bit of a secret defense mission. And various people said, I was a retired general. And they said, well, this must indicate that there was that NASA had detected an alien base on the moon and was working with the CIA and to bomb this alien base. And the scientists that were running the program, my program, after it, I said, "What did you say that for?" I said, "Oh, nobody will pay any attention to that." It turned out it got a lot of attention. I got all sorts of emails from people that said, "Oh, I'm a mother. I've got 3 kids. They want to grow up. Please don't start an interplanetary war," and so on and so forth. And And I was counseled by the NASA administrator. It was at that time it was Charlie Bolden, and he said, "What'd you say that for?" And I said, it was just a joke. Everybody knew that. And he said, "Well, actually, I've got some congressmen here coming to my office that want to understand why we're working with the CIA to bomb aliens on the moon." But anyhow, it was a very successful mission. The aliens are gone, by the way, and it confirmed that there was substantial amounts of water in the lunar poles, permanently shadowed craters, something like 5% by volume and weight, and I think a very important result. So I'm quite excited about this, despite the fact I almost got fired over it. We finally got a real mission, and we had to be a little secret about it. So we had it in an old paint shop that the Navy had at NASA AMES. My staff called it Area 51. And we were trying to develop a lunar lander, a low-cost lunar lander that would cost tens of millions, not hundreds of millions or billions. And so we had what's called a hover test facility where we demonstrated that this thing might work. Again, I almost got fired about it when it got public. But in the end, we did get this mission called LADEE, which we were forced to work with NASA Goddard, which just meant the cost was 3 times higher. And but they're very good, so it actually worked. This was the lunar atmosphere environment observer in it to explore, and it was designed to study the residual lunar atmosphere. Again, a very, very successful mission. We actually launched it on a refurbished Peacekeeper. It's called a Minotaur 5 from the Wallops launch complex in Virginia. And this is a pretty cool mission. It was launched at about midnight, but it turns out it rained a lot just before it got launched, and there were pools of water nearby. And when the booster, which is a solid fuel booster, launched, apparently there was a nice frog that was sitting quietly in one of the ponds, and it all got blasted into the air. So this frog is immortalized here on this image when LADEE was launched. And my wife is quite a sort of animal person, and she asked me, "Well, is the frog all right?" And I said, "Dear, I'm sure the frog is wonderful." I didn't have the heart to tell her it was probably immediately roasted to death. But again, so in addition to going to the moon, we also launched a frog. I just want to point out that there's a lot of discussion, and this is kind of what I want to talk about the next few minutes. That all we needed to do was have the President of the United States, push us to go back to the moon. And again, we had 2 presidents that said we're going to go to the moon, both Bushes, and that didn't go anywhere. When I was at NASA, we got President Obama to say we're going to go to an asteroid. And you probably remember the Asteroid Redirect Mission. There was human missions going to asteroids, and of course that didn't go anywhere either. So I think one of the big concerns that how do we address this issue of we've gotten now a number of presidents to say that we're going to go to the moon. I mean, most recently was President Trump said we're going back to the moon, and so forth. So I don't think this is really the way it's going to happen. So one of the things that I've done is to try to find other countries that may have a better effort. And one of the reasons I'm in Europe is I'm a advisor to the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. In 2016, they announced the Space Resources Initiative, which is an effort to go to the moon and Mars or moon and asteroids to get resources that would benefit people on Earth. And this is a picture of the announcement, the formal press conference. You see me on one end, and the other end is Jean-Jacques Godin, the former Director General of ESA, and the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of Luxembourg. So Luxembourg has put hundreds of millions of euros into this topic, and is very much focused on not traditional space exploration, but on commercial development of space and particularly of lunar and asteroid resources. There's about 30 or 40 startups now in Luxembourg. There's a number of programs. Luxembourg was one of the first 6 countries that signed the Artemis Accords with NASA to focus on space exploration, particularly the commercial development. Luxembourg is kind of interesting. It's a small country, only 600,000 people. It's also the richest per capita country on Earth. So they've done a really good job of getting marshaling support for commercial use of space resources. A lot of countries won't sign an agreement with the United States because we're a big bad superpower, but small Luxembourg is able to do a lot, and they've moved this forward quite impressively in terms of getting beginning to get a consensus. I mean, there's still arguments about it, about use of lunar and asteroid resources. I want to close with a discussion of the private sector of the moon. In 2014, when I was still the director at NASA Ames, I had a number of young people that I brought to Ames that were quite excited about space and the moon. There was one group of them that were kind of led by a young British guy, Will Marshall, and that in 2014 they had managed to get a couple, really big billionaires in Silicon Valley interested in the moon, including Sergey Brin and from Google and a number of others. So we had a little workshop, and the workshop, was very well attended by a variety of people, former Apollo astronauts and other experts of the moon. And the conclusion was that we could probably establish a lunar settlement within a decade, for something of the order of, a few billion to 10 billion. And so they established, I think it was in 2017, Open Lunar Foundation, which is focused on basically lunar settlement, private lunar settlement. I want to note that these people founded Planet Labs that just a few days ago, had their IPO at a $2.8 billion initial offering or valuation. So these folks personally now are, I don't know if they're billionaires yet. I mean, of course, this is a valuation. They actually got but at least they've got a lot of money to go ahead and start. So I think that we're beginning to see, a really significant interest in this, and they've got a lot of other, high net worth backers. So I suspect we're going to see private lunar settlements, hopefully by the end of the decade, and if not soon after. So, whereas I'm concerned, as Namrata was, that of Chinese and other efforts, but I think that in the end that these private efforts, coupled with efforts of smaller countries like Luxembourg that are going to that are really emphasizing private space development and development for economic purposes, that in the end I'm pretty confident that the winning combination is going to be in these private sector efforts. And of course, there's many others. Obviously Jeff Bezos is interested in using the moon. Elon Musk is certainly as well, and a lot of it again is based on space resources. I think initially for fuel. And I have to really close that I'm I suppose interested in, and I'm sure there are other discussions in this conference about where we're going to settle. And I think lunar lava tubes is kind of an interesting location. And this is my own personal suggestion, is where these private sector groups might end up. There's probably some of these lava tubes have a lot of water resources and other things. And I think that's where we're going to go. Well, let me close there, and I think we got a few minutes here for some questions that I'd be happy to address.
There's so much here in your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna pass the first question off to Professor Thangvalu. I think you know him at USC, but his first question is, will we see private crews landing before Artemis?
Well,
That's like throwing down the gauntlet on that one. So that's.
I don't know. I think so and hope so. You know, of course, I love the government. I mean, I spent most of my career working for the U.S. government, and you know, I now still work for governments. I work for the Luxembourg government part-time, and but I think in the end, my bet is on the private sector.
Yeah.
And it's you know, I suspect that, you know, I mean, okay, already the Artemis schedule is sort of thrown the 2024 date out of the window, and you know, I mean, this is the government after all, so you know, at the end of the decade maybe, but I think these private groups are pretty serious, and I think they're gonna do it, and you know, I don't know which one will be first, but you know, it's sort of interesting when I met Jeff Bezos about 20 years ago, and it was in a kind of a breakfast cafe in Seattle, and you know, when Jeff comes in, you know, when you meet him, you know, he just strikes you as a standard sort of computer geek, and with kind of a very unique laugh, and so you know, after we had a few you know, some breakfast, you know, I asked him what his objective was. He says, "Look, I'm just selling books so I can build rockets." And of course, he sold a lot of books. So, you know, I think that he's pretty serious. I mean, I know Elon Musk, and you know, he's very serious and is done what he said he did. I mean, not as quick as he said he was going to do it. But there's a lot of others and I sort of, you know, focused on one group. You know, these young people that I brought to AMES with me, you know, here, you know, 15 years ago, they've all said they want to do lunar settlement, and they've both mobilized high net worth people, and now they themselves are high net worth people, and so I think they're pretty serious. They're gonna get to the moon, and there are probably others. You know, one of the other groups that I've been working with is Rocket Lab. You know, Peter Beck is the founder of that. When I was at NASA AMES, he showed up there as this sort of kind of wide-eyed, you know, young New Zealander that was going to build a rocket, and he had an idea of what he called a toothpaste rocket, that you had a solid fuel that if you put it under compression, it would turn to liquid. We worked with him, and of course that didn't work, but he's now interested in sending private probes to Venus, and in fact, my foundation is working with him on some possibilities to look for life. And so I think these folks are pretty serious, and they're probably going to succeed.
Amazing. It's so much fun to watch this stuff unfold right now. I feel like every day there's a new breakthrough, a new opportunity. James Burke, the Vice President of the Moon Society, asked a question. When you were working on Clementine, did you expect to find water, or was that somewhat of an accident?
Well, it's an interesting question, and you know, I have to give credit where credit's due. Stu knows that, who you can probably look online as an interesting history. He and I were at many bars, and you know, after the mission launched, you know, he showed up and said, "Look, you know, there may actually be water on the moon." And he looked at, there were other data that said there could be, and he sort of waxed rather, you know, kind of almost religiously, and he said, "Look, I don't believe in God, but if God existed and intended us to go to space, there would be water on the moon as a to encourage us to move on out." And and so he and some graduate students devised this idea of using the Clementine radar and this was after it was launched, is a bistatic way to get into these craters. I mean, the geometry was just right that you could bounce the signal off the floor of these permanently shadowed craters and actually get data. And they figured out that it would be circularly polarized in a certain way if there were crystalline structure that was most likely ice. And we did the experiments, and sure enough, it was positive. And I mean, it wasn't proof that there was ice. And of course, then another unique mission, NASA AMES had, well, I think it was Lunar Prospector mission, that was again a kind of a private sector thing with Lockheed Martin, and who were trying to build a new booster. And it began to look, discover neutrons and things that suggested there was water there. And then the LCROSS mission proved it. It was sort of interesting. Stu, just before he ended up being a guest of the U.S. government for about a decade, after we discovered that the ice, he said, "Remember, you guys didn't discover it, I did." And I said, "Well, that was my program too." But yes, it was it was a bit of a serendipitous discovery. We were just trying to do space weapon tests.
So let's talk about the future, right? So you're in the spot, you're in a very influential and inspirational position with Luxembourg. I know that you've worked with other nations as well. I won't out anybody that you don't want me to say, but what are they trying to do, right? Nobody thought that Luxembourg was going to be a space power. Like, that caught me off guard. So in a nutshell, what are they trying to do? What's your role there? And what are their expectations? What are their hopes?
Well, Luxembourg is an interesting country. In the mid 19th century, it was kind of one of the most impoverished places in Europe. It had been fought over, and it was kind of divided between Belgium and France wanted it back, and the Germans wanted it. And the compromise the British negotiated in the mid 19th century was, the half of it spoke this bizarre Germanic language called Luxembourgish, was granted independence, but it was subject to the Dutch crown, and that didn't work out very well. But Luxembourg, had really no resources. It was a small agricultural country. Over half the population immigrated, many of them to the New World, Canada, the United States, and actually Brazil. And but then they discovered iron ore and coal, and they built a steel industry that was very successful in the late 19th century. And in the 20th century, the very successful steel refining and industry attracted the attention of its big neighbor to the east, who twice decided to incorporate Luxembourg into the Greater Reich. And that wasn't very well received, but fortunately they again gained independence. There are stories there of what the Grand Duchess had to do with the President of the United States to get that agreement, but anyhow, we'll leave that for a drink. And but they realized that the steel industry wasn't going to last forever. So in the kind of late 60s and early 70s, they started to get other industry in. And one of them was communications. They'd long been the only country in Europe that actually allowed commercial radio broadcasting, and banking. But they understood all these could all leave in an instant. And so in the 80s, they decided that they were going to finance their first commercial, ComSat outside of the United States, and they formed SES.
SES Global, yeah.
Which is now, essentially the biggest ComSat, geosynchronous ComSat. And it turned out the deputy prime minister told me there were a lot of debates in the parliament where, what do we need this for? We already have, 2 channels of TV that are from 5 to 10. Why do you need all these other things? And they're worried the satellites are going to fall down and Luxembourg would be liable. It turned out they actually had the first satellite failed. They self-insured it. it was about 5% of their gross national product would have, you know, so I think it's pretty gutsy for a country to, you know, to say, I mean, I can't imagine the United States betting 5% of our,
No.
you know, GDP on some space thing. But it turned out to be very successful. And I mean, as they said, I mean, Luxembourg's a lot bigger in space than it is on the ground. It's 1,000 square miles on the ground, and it's got, you know, between Intelsat and SES, it's got, you know, over 100 satellite slots. But they decided to expand on that. And in the, you know, this last decade, and it turned out that, you know, my first interest in Luxembourg was we had hired a postdoctoral fellow who was one of the first people the government had actually sent to get his PhD in astronomy at AMES. And, you know, he told me, like most Luxembourgers, he likes to drink wine, and so do I, that I should go visit Luxembourg. And so I said, really? I said, I thought that was a little country you went through to get cheap booze and, you know, gas. And he said, no, he told me about SES. And so I ended up showing up, and I ended up meeting with the Minister of the Economy, who was soon to become the Deputy Prime Minister, named Etienne Schneider. And his family had made a lot of money in the mining concerns. And, you know, he was, you know, one of the coalition leads, and actually his party is the Socialist Workers' Party. So, but it's sort of interesting. You know, I asked him once, I said, there can't possibly be any socialist workers left in Luxembourg. And he said, well, he said, that's our problem. We're losing votes. And I said, so your only socialist workers are like junior bank vice presidents, I assume. And, but anyway, they were very successful. And, you know, they really put Luxembourg on the map. They believe by the end of this decade that 10% of their GDP will be space.
10%.
And it's, you know, they're already a couple percent. And, you know, so it's been very successful. It's really put them on the global map and global attention. They've got a very robust, you know, diplomatic effort around the world, and that's been very successful in beginning to build consensus on commercial space resources. They sponsored there was the I guess called the Hague working group that was looking at, you know, how do we, you know, rather than just throwing old treaties out the window, we just, what's the protocols to allow this? So, you know, I'm sort of impressed what small countries can do. I mean, if you want to see the prime minister, his office is off the Central Market, you just go in and knock on his door, and it's you know, that's, you know, it's very hard to do that in the United States. To just, I mean, you know, a century and a half ago, you could go see the president, but you can't do that anymore. So it's and there are other countries. I mean, you mentioned I'm working now with the Kingdom of Bhutan and Rwanda. You know, that I think some of these smaller countries, they understand that space inspires their people. You know, space has been very valuable for Luxembourg to inspire the next generation of people to go into these high-tech things. So I just like the United States and China for that matter.
Terrific. One last question as we wrap up the day. You know, Josh Carlson talked earlier about some of the development processes as we you know, as Americans moved across the West, and then using some historical analogies, kind of trying to figure out how we move out to the moon. And then also tomorrow, Major Sean McLean, active officer for Space Force, is going to be talking about some of his research and you know, development of the cislunar environment. But and then also, I think, you know, Pete Gerritsen is going to be talking about a paper that he just recently wrote. So can you give us the Worden line idea? Can you talk to us about the Worden?
Yeah, just briefly. This was one of my students at AMES is Matt Daniels, who works for the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon, and also is at Georgetown University. And he he and I had a lot of discussions, again, like most good discussions over many beers.
Yep.
Yeah, we began to talk about that there's what really matters in the future is things that are in cislunar space and beyond. And so, we began to discuss where does that begin? And where do you begin to have the domination by the Earth-Moon gravitational system, rather than just the Earth? And it turns out it's roughly 100,000 kilometers up. And so he had some briefings he gave at the Pentagon and the White House and other places that, in honor of me and the many beers I'd given him, it was called the Worden line. And, but I think that's an important place that I believe the future competition, whether it's commercial or national or international, is really based on beyond that line. And I'm very honored by that Dr. Daniels decided to name it after me, and it really should be called the Daniels Worden line, I think. But just like the argument of the where's the line at Space, the von Neumann line.
Yeah,
I think that that's roughly 100 kilometers, so 100,000 kilometers is a good place to begin to, and that's clearly, and I think many of the discussants here, that's where our strategic competition is, for economic competition. That's where our future is. So, I'm happy to have my name attached to it, but in truth, the mathematical definition of that is really Matt Daniels' responsibility and invention.
Terrific. Thank you very much, sir. Always fascinating to talk to you. I learned so much whenever you're around.